Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Charl from the Walt. I'm the head for security research, Orange Cyber Defense. Really, it's a huge privilege for me to be here, and I'm very honored to have your time and your attention for this hour. I've been doing this work, and I've been in this space for a very long time, and you think a lot about what you can say at an opportunity like this, and actually found it really hard. I feel like there's so much that I don't understand, so much that confuses me, and doesn't feel like it's easy to impart something that'll be useful to other people. So what I want to do instead is to tell you some stories. These are stories, some of them are about cybersecurity, most of them aren't. But I'm hoping that through these stories, you'll come to understand some things about the space that we work in that I think I've come to understand. So I live in Cape Town in South Africa, right down on the south, where the little finger sticks out into the Atlantic Ocean. This is a picture of False Bay. It's called False Bay because the sailors used to come from the east and they'd round the Cape, and they think they'd arrive in Cape Town, but actually they still had to go around Cape Point. So they called it False Bay. It's this beautiful big mouth that sticks out into the oceans, 40 kilometers wide. And it's famous for all kinds of things. And one of the things that it's famous for is surfing. This is a break just across from my house. It's called Cork Bay Reef. It's a small but very beautiful wave. They're very popular with the surfers. That's not me. I look something more like this when I'm surfing. You have to have humor in a presentation, it breaks the ice, right? So I look something more like this. But when people come and visit me from abroad, I have people coming to visit from America or Australia, and they're surfers, they want to surf, but they're not prepared to surf in False Bay. They don't want to go, they won't put their feet in the water in False Bay. And the reason for that is because of another thing that False Bay is very famous for, which is these bad boys. The great white shark. We have, I believe, the highest concentration of great white sharks in False Bay as any place in the planet. Funnily enough, the concentration's been going down, which is good news. The bad news is it's because the orcas are eating the sharks. So I don't know if you want to go in the water anymore. In any case, so a great white shark, 6 meters long, 2,000 kilograms, 300 teeth. It's literally a living, breathing, eating machine. When my friends come, they don't want to go into the water because, understandably, they don't want to get eaten by a great white shark. I can relate to that. And then I try to explain to them, I say, you know, if you go surfing in the ocean with the great white shark, you are more likely to die in the car on the way to the beach than you are to die at the beach, right? But of course, that doesn't placate them at all. They still won't go into the water. And that's because of something called a form of cognitive bias called the proximity heuristic. Basically, the proximity heuristic causes us to overestimate the impact of things that are near in our memories. And things that are near are typically things that have got evocative images, strong ideas, you know, the teeth, the scars, the underwater shark. When we read stories about those things, they stick in our minds. Whereas in South Africa, thousands of people die on the roads every day. And we don't remember that because the image is not as visceral, it's not as powerful, right? So we tend to overestimate, we tend to overrate the impact of things that are visceral, that are visual, over the things that are maybe more dangerous but less dramatic, right? And so that led me thinking about this incident in 1941, Pearl Harbor, the attack by the air service of the Japanese fleet. And of course, it's an incident that will stay stuck in our memories forever. And it's full of the same sorts of imagery as a great shark evokes. You know, you've got these kamikaze pilots, you've got big explosions, you've got people dying in terrible ways. And so in 2012, a US senator introduced this idea of a cyber Pearl Harbor. His name was Leon Panetta. And he started trying to capture people's attention trying to draw their attention to the problem of cybersecurity by evoking these images, right? The images of Pearl Harbor. And of course, it's very effective. You still hear cyber Pearl Harbor spoken about today. I did a quick search, March, April 2024. You look on Mastodon or Twitter, cyber Pearl Harbor, cyber Pearl Harbor. And it's an effective tool because it plugs into that proximity heuristic, right? We remember things because they have these evocative images. But I think that cyber Pearl Harbor is not the worst thing that can happen to us in cyber. I think this idea of things exploding, of people dying, as terrible as that is, I think it's not the worst kind of thing that we can imagine. I think there are more slow and sad ways of expressing tragedy than something that's as visceral and violent as this. And what comes to my mind when I think about that is what happened in 2016 with the US elections, where we know for a fact that by exploiting vulnerabilities in cybersecurity, Russian actors were able to, surface these emails from the Democratic National Convention. They were able to use those emails to influence public opinion. And we don't know for a fact how the election would have gone if that hadn't happened. But we know, we can believe, I think, that the world is a different place today than it would have been if it wasn't for a cybersecurity failure. There were no bombs, there's no explosions, but in a very cynical, insidious way, the world was affected by this failure in cybersecurity. And I think what makes me the saddest about it, the thing that makes it the most horrible, is that what died when the US elections were manipulated in 2016 was trust, was faith, was our belief in something that we hold to be dear. Right? We believe in the freedom that we get through democracy. We believe that we can have a conversation with each other about it. We believe that we can surface the truth, and in that way direct our futures. But what happened was that failed. It was replaced with fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so although there was no big bang, so to speak, in very many ways it was an attack on the sovereignty of the USA that had the same long-standing implications as Pearl Harbor did. And the death of trust is a terrible thing, because trust is the infrastructure on which modern society is built. If you think of something complex in society like this freeway system, the reason the freeway system works, the reason you can drive at 120 kilometers an hour listening to Spotify, talking to your mom and checking the map without worrying is because you know that the concrete is solid, that the roads are well designed, that the car is going to work, that the traffic signals are right, that law enforcement is in place. You have to believe all of those things before you'll jet with your car across that road. And the minute you stop believing that, all of the stuff that we've built stops working, right? So a death of trust is the collapse of infrastructure, and everything that we've built in the modern world starts to collapse on top of it. And so again, although there's no big explosions, although there's no Pearl Harbor, we have a very tragic death, I think, in things like faith, in things like relationship, in things like truth, and ultimately in things like democracy and freedom die when we fail to maintain the trust that we have in digital systems. And all of us that sit here today are involved somewhere in that process, right? The hack of the Russians on the DNC didn't involve something that we don't understand. Any one of you here could have predicted that attack. Any one of you could explain how it worked. Any one of you could have said what had to be done to prevent it from happening, right? So this consequence is really directly in our domain. Another thing that we like when we think about risks and threats is we like to think of a predator. Right? We'd like to think of an adversary, an actor, a something that's after us. I always quote this adage from Africa that says, in the morning when the gazelle wakes up, she knows that she has to run faster than the fastest lion, otherwise the lion's going to eat her. And similarly, when the lion wakes up, she knows she has to run faster than the slowest gazelle, else she's going to starve to death. And so in Africa, we all wake up and we start running. And this idea reminds me very much of cybersecurity. I feel like that's what we do. We wake up and we start running. We're running to patch vulnerabilities, we're running to mitigate threats, we're running to deal with whatever our CTO just bought and plugged in. We're running to, comply with some new standards, run the whole time. But it's also an idea that captures us because we like the idea that there's a lion and we can see that lion and we know that the lion's coming from us and we know what we have to do is we have to outmaneuver, outrun this lion. And so it's a comforting idea. It's simple, right? It's like the shark, visceral and clean. But Dr. Dan Geer points out to us that that's actually not how risk works. Risk emerges in this transitive way from what he calls interdependence, which is this idea that we all depend on each other in some way or another. Everything is interconnected and interdependent. And so you escaping the lion doesn't solve the problem of cybersecurity because other people, other things are still at risk. As long as one of us in this massively complicated, interconnected world that is security today, as long as one of us is still at risk, because of Geer's idea of interdependence, we are all at risk, right? And he talks about the transitive nature of it. I depend on Leon. Leon depends on Vickers. Vickers depends on, WhatsApp. And so, if WhatsApp fails, then all of us have a consequence. And we can see the manifestation of that idea in simple, small things. This is an old slide I've had that I've been using for years. In 2019, when there was this attack against the municipal systems in Baltimore, they did interviews with people who used those systems. And you can see so clearly in their language how, although Baltimore City was the primary victim, there were these secondary and tertiary victims who were affected by this cybersecurity failure because of this idea of interdependence, right? Because dependence is transitive. But I think that there's a more profound understanding of that idea also. And to explain that, I want to reiterate what Nicholas Taleb said in his book about black swans. He describes these two realities, right? On the one hand, you have, I can never pronounce it, but it's Mediocristan, I think. So the reality of the medium, where everything is bound in sort of Gaussian curves, right? He says human height, for example, is never going to exceed, 7 foot. Your test scores can never be more than 100%, right? We can predict the range of possible outcomes in realities that are, that belong to Mediocristan. But then he also describes Extremistan, which is the realities where that is not the case, where things are unbounded. And he talks about, stock market returns or book sales or things that emerge out of spaces that are where exponentiality is a reality. And I believe that cyberspace is one of those realities because of its interconnectedness. In cyberspace, things can happen that go beyond the normal Gaussian curve. In other words, we're very vulnerable to what Taleb calls the black swan events. Things that don't happen often, but when they happen can be genuinely cataclysmic. And that in turn reminds me of the development, the Manhattan Project. We all watched the Oppenheimer movie. And some of you may have read The Doomsday Machine. But they describe this testing of the first nuclear bomb. It was called the Trinity Project. And there's two things about this that intrigue me. The one is, I think the idea of a nuclear explosion explains this concept of Extremistan that Taleb was trying to capture, because a nuclear explosion happens because of a chain of effects. Right? It's not the first atom that gets split or the second or the third, right? It's this chain effect that gets kicked off. And it's possible because of the interconnected nature of that system. But the other thing that fascinates me about it is a story that you may have heard, which is that before the testing, the scientists were wondering, they were concerned about the possibility that this chain reaction would set the hydrogen in the atmosphere on fire, and then even set the oceans on fire, and basically that we would incinerate the entire planet. Right? They'd never done it before, and they calculated that there was a real possibility that this could happen. And they wondered to themselves, like, should we do this? Should we carry on? And so they made a risk decision. They said if there's more than a 3 in 1 million chance that the atmosphere will be set on fire, then we're not going to do it. That would be too risky. But if it's less than 3 in 1 million, then, that's okay. On balance of probabilities, we'll take that risk. And the story goes that in the end, they did the calculations, and it was just less than 3 in 1 million. Just less than 3 in 1 million. They said, well, on that basis, it's probably worth the risk of exploding the entire planet. Now, in that reality, during the Second World War, where you had the threat of Hitler and you had the threat of the Japanese Empire, maybe that was a probability that they could deal with, right? Maybe that was acceptable to them. That was a reasonable balance. But I think most of us in today's reality, we don't have that. That's not the reality we live in. And so the risk of something exponential happening, the risk of something that can destroy our planet or destroy the fabric of society should not be tolerable to us. We should not accept even 3 in 1 million, if the consequence is the entire collapse of something that we hold dear. And I hope I'm making sense. The point I want to make so far is this, that in cybersecurity, what we do matters, and when we fail, it matters, and it's probably not mattering in the way that Cyber Pearl Harbor describes. Rick, with all respect to you, Rick is in OT security, so he likes to think about making things blow up. He wants to see robots going crazy and stuff like that. But with all due respect, that is not the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is the insidious collapse of something that we hold dear. And because of our interconnectedness, the impact of that can be far bigger than we like to imagine for ourselves. So I want to tell you another story. This is not about 0 days. This is actually about day 0. And it's about the time that the water ran out in Cape Town. It was in 2017, end of 2017. The government started warning us that our dams were running dry. And we hadn't had rain in the winter, the summers were dry, and the water was running out. And not only did they put water restrictions in place, first it was 87 liters per person per day, then it was 50 liters per person per day. But they started talking about day 0. And day 0 is the day, the actual moment in time, when you open your tap and there's no more water. There's nothing. It doesn't come out. When you think about it, a tap only does one thing, right? You open it and the water comes out. Imagine all the taps in a city of 5 million people, you open the tap, and no water comes out. Now, I want to be clear on this. I'm not talking about a desert, Somalia, we're all used to those pictures. I'm talking about a place like this, where people already at that time were queuing to collect water from open water springs in plastic buckets of 25 liters. It's an absolutely apocalyptic scenario. They compared it with 9/11 in terms of the social impact of not having water. The plan was to have 200 water collection points around the city where every person could rock up with one bucket of 25 liters, and you could take your 25 liters home every day. An absolute catastrophe in the making. And so the city moved to start reducing our water consumption across these 5 million, 6 million people. And they had this concept of day 0, and they said, we can work together to reduce consumption and therefore avoid day 0, or at least postpone day 0. And the city did all kinds of very clever things, like producing these infographics that would explain to you how much water you consume when you do different things. So cooking only takes 1 liter, that's all right. Don't clean your house too often because that takes 5 liters. Toilets, total no-no, 9 liters every time you flush the toilet. That's a lot of your 25, right? That's less than 3 flushes a day for your 25. And then if you brush your teeth and wash your hands, that's 2 liters. And they had these posters up everywhere you go, showing you ways you can save water. There you can see the flushing one. They had these stickers up everywhere, like in a restaurant that said, if it's yellow, let it mellow. Don't flush the toilet unless You really, really have to. And take a short shower. You can take your phone into the shower with you if you have an Android, but not an iPhone. And then collect your water, reuse your water. So when you shower in a bucket. So you can use that water and put it in the toilet when you flush. And people were really doing this. Here you can see a woman, you can see all the buckets in the shower, and you can see the open cistern in the toilet, because after the family showered, you've got just enough water for one flush, you know. And I remember my mother-in-law was doing this. She took it very seriously. She was like 70 years old, you know, a little old lady, lives in a 2-story house. And in her basin, she had a plastic bucket. And she had a hose pipe that came out of the bucket and went out the bathroom window and down into the plants in the garden below. And she would suck her 2 liters of, you know, brush teeth and wash hands. She would suck that 2 liters down and then give her plants some water with the 2 liters. And it made me so incredibly sad to see it. So sad to see how the things that we take for granted in life can disappear. Right? You take it for granted. You open the tap, the water comes out. And yet here's this little old lady, you know, with a hose pipe coming out of her bathroom window. And what frustrated me about it was that as hard as she was trying, every time she used the bucket to put the water in the plants, she was saving what? A liter and a half? The city was consuming somewhere between 500 and 600 million liters a day. Her 1 liter is not making a dent. What was making a dent, but she was doing it, right? She was doing it, and the city was very proud of its campaign to get people involved in this process. And I was very caught by this idea of fear working, right? The marketing got people worked up in saving water, and we did. We just about halved water consumption across the city. But here's another infographic that the city produced, showing some of the vital statistics. But I wanted to show you this one at the bottom. For all that the people were doing to halve their consumption, the city had not achieved even 60% of its infrastructure goals during that crisis. Because what the city really needed was more water. It didn't need my mother-in-law to save her toothbrush water, right? And the reality of the situation was that in the whatever it was, 15 years since 1995, the population of the city had almost doubled, but the dam infrastructure had only increased by 15%. That was the problem with the water. Not that my mother-in-law was flushing the toilet twice a day. And there were several other problems also, not just in the building of infrastructure, but in the maintenance of infrastructure, right? Where pipes were leaking, for example, where reservoirs would get salinated, sand would build up, so the dams couldn't hold the water that they needed. And that we had alien vegetation that uses more water than it should. So my mother-in-law was the victim of a systemic failure. Right? It was a failure to plan, a failure to build, a failure to maintain, a change in the environment, global warming, decreased rain over time. So there was a system of meta factors that created this crisis in Cape Town. Not immediately, not like Pearl Harbor, but slowly through decay. We ended up in this place where the taps didn't work anymore. And our response as a population was for people to stop showering and flushing the toilet. And that reminds me of this theme that you might have seen in my summary of this talk, which is this idea about recycling. I don't know how it is for you, but it's like this for me. I go to the store, I want to buy some stuff, and every single thing I buy is covered in plastic. I don't know what it's like in Switzerland. You may be more developed here than us, but you can't buy a cucumber that's not in plastic, all right? Everything's in plastic. And the plastics are causing a crisis, right? They're causing a pollution crisis. They're causing an environmental crisis. False Bay, the picture that I showed you, when the tide goes out, you see the bottles of water just lying on the floor of the ocean. And then the tide comes in, you don't see them again. You forget about it for the next day. So what do? We recycle. We take our stuff home, we separate it out, we put everything in its bin, we spend hours and hours and hours, busily working away to reduce plastic consumption. But plastic consumption isn't a function of what we recycle, it's a function of what the industry produces, right? It's a function of, frankly, big businesses that know that they can save money, keep products for longer, distribute more cheaply because they use plastics. And the result of it is that plastic waste is just building and building and building at a systemic level. And recycling is not only not effective, only 10% of the plastics that we recycle, of the plastics that we use ever actually get recycled. It's not only that it's not effective, it's also distraction. Right? We're also busy recycling, also busy separating our garbage into different bins, that we never realize, we never stop to look and say, but this is a problem with the system that's working the way it's intended. And recycling is a cynical scheme that's designed to keep us focusing on our own obligations, our own guilt, our own shame about what we're doing, instead of what's broken with the system. And that makes me so angry. So finally, I can talk about some cyber. 2019, CVE 2019-11510 was a file reading vulnerability in Pulse Secure. And it became a big deal. A lot of you remember it was just at the start of lockdown. Everyone's rolling VPNs out left, right, and center. Pulse Secure, RCE, remote command execution vulnerabilities straight over the internet, simple exploit, and people are being owned left, right, and center. I always laugh at the timing of this because this was at exactly the time that Ivanti was busy acquiring Pulse. You'll remember Vickers and I were talking about it, and we were like, do they even know what they're buying? You know, like this, why would you spend money on this? And I can sort of imagine the negotiations in the room, you know, with the lawyers standing across from each other, now 15%, now 7%, and then the other guys would be like, oh, there is a slight issue with the fact that your product is the cause of all these extreme security events across the planet. Any case, so 2019 came and went. And my team and I, we produced something called the Security Navigator. It's our annual report. And in the Security Navigator, we noticed during 2019 that there was a surge in issues regarding security products. Right? Lots of vulnerabilities, lots of exploits, lots of issues emerging in security products. We issue these advisories every time there's a serious security vulnerability. And a large proportion of them involve the products that we also sell and service and maintain for our clients. And our advice to our clients at the time, I looked at this very carefully, was to tell our clients that they must make sure that they are ready to patch, that they have systems in place. What are the, people, process, and technology? You've got to be ready, because when vulnerabilities come, you're going to have to sort them out and patch them, else you're going to be in trouble. Then, and we published, Charl did this work, we published this beautiful cascade that showed how, on the subject of interdependence, how these vulnerabilities in security products are all connected by common factors that they share, either the same researcher or the same vendor or the same kind of vulnerability. And you can show this whole cascading effect of vulnerabilities and exploits in security technologies and how they're sort of all related to each other. Vickers and I also did a presentation in that same year at Black Hat, where we assessed, in effect, whether VPN technologies were solving the problems that remote access users even had at that time. And VPN technologies, I forget, Vickers, 2009, 2001, they emerged as a technology. And by this time, this is now 20 years later, we said, well, are VPN technologies actually solving a problem that we still have, for all the extra code bloat and features bloat that they bring? Are these an effective solution? And our conclusion was, not so much. We didn't, of course, because we're a vendor, we didn't say anything harsh or direct, and I think our opinion was balanced. But we were raising very real questions about whether we even needed this kind of tech. So then comes 2021, and again, persistent vulnerabilities, attacks, and compromises involving cybersecurity technologies continue to feature prominently, and then we list them. VMware, Pulse, Cynical, Citrix, Fortinet, F5, Palo, they're all in there, right? They're all causing problems for us at the time. But this time we got a bit more bold. We said, no, this isn't good enough. We need to have a discussion with these vendors, not about why there's vulnerabilities, but how we can change the system so that these vulnerabilities become less prominent, less common, and maybe more manageable. And I was very passionate about this idea at the time. And so I sent a few emails and I had a few phone calls and I spoke to a few people. But basically, in truth, regarding that conversation, nothing ever happened. 2022, in our thing, in our report, we noted again, out of the CISA top 15, significant number of the vulnerabilities that are being exploited in the wild to impact our customers are developed by, are in products that are developed by security vendors. We didn't say anything, again, about the responsibility of security vendors to change that, or our responsibility to adjust the system. 2023 report, we barely said anything. There was one incident involving the Norwegian government, also a Pulse product at the time. Again, no comments on the system or the factors that created that problem. And then in 2024, January, there's another Ivanti vulnerability. This one runs out of control so badly that the US government CISA agency instructs its clients to unplug the device. Now, I don't know about you, but when I saw this, I was horrified. I felt like deeply ashamed that we had gotten to a point that a product that we collectively build, maintain, sell, support, advocate, was causing so many problems in security that people were being told to rather take it out to improve their security. Now, I don't work for Ivanti, and I don't know if anyone here works for Ivanti, but I could work for Ivanti, right? The fact that I don't work for Ivanti, that's just an accident of history. I might as well work for Ivanti. The people who work for Ivanti are passionate about security, as committed to making the world a safer place as I am. This isn't about Ivanti or about Paolo or about Citrix or F5. This is about our collective failure as an industry to arrive at a place where this kind of nonsense doesn't happen. And of course, a few months later, then that became a very busy month, right, of that vulnerability. The whole of January was just busy responding to the issues that the Ivanti vulnerability caused. And I'm sure it was the same for all of you. It was certainly the same for us. We had hundreds, thousands of clients that were impacted and had to be patched. We had hundreds of cert call-outs where we had to respond to clients that were that had been impacted or thought they'd been impacted. We were researching the issue in real time, understanding it, trying to communicate that to our clients. We discovered and reported the backdoor, the persistent backdoor, and we published blog posts about it. We had a webinar, which we ironically called 40 Days of Mayhem, where we just tried to explain to people what the hell was actually going on and what they needed to do to mitigate the crisis. We were busy dealing with the crisis until a few months later, the Palo Alto bug broke. And now we're busy dealing with that crisis again. And the point is, it reminds me of the recycling, right? That's really the trap that we're in, is that we're so busy sorting our trash and putting it into the right cans and, carrying it out to the trucks, that we don't stop to notice that fundamentally there is a system that is broken. The water in Cape Town didn't run out because of a Pearl Harbor style effect. The water in Cape Town ran out because we failed to understand and respond to and maintain and develop a system that could continue producing water that people needed even as the city grew. That's the trap that we're in. And it's not about the vendors making mistakes. It's us collectively being stuck in this cycle of pouring our toothpaste water into the plants instead of stepping back to understand what's really going on. And just to be clear, everyone is guilty of this. We recently did a talk about when we founded, I helped to found a company called SensePost, a pen testing company. And in 2002, we launched a vulnerability scanner, a remote cloud vulnerability scanner. So think, what is it now, Nessus or, I forget now, you know what I mean, remote scanning tools. We had a big party and it was very flashy. That's me on the left there when we still had hair. That was in 2002, right? What is that? 21 years ago. 21 years ago, we launched this vulnerability scanning technology. Do you know that today we reckon that not more than 15% of all vulnerabilities that are reported to our customers ever get patched? 22 years of scanning and 15% of vulnerabilities get. That is not a good number. That is not something that we can be proud of. It's great that we're still selling the product. It's wonderful. It's an excellent business venture. But really, in terms of impacting the security problem, were we doing the right things, or were we just recycling our plastic? So I have another story, another experience, which is that I had this opportunity to sail on a boat from Cape Town to Sydney. 26 days, 10,000 miles. You go through the Southern Ocean. It's crazy. Every day you work in 4-hour shifts. Every day you wake up and it's like mad. There's water, there's waves, there's rain, there's crisis after crisis after crisis. But there's one thing that happens on the boat every day on the hour, and that is that we check the barometer. Now, funnily enough, the barometer, those boats are high-tech, right? But the barometer looks like this. It's like a little tin wheel with a little thing on it. Every time I had to read the barometer, I wanted to tap the glass, because you see them doing it on the movies, like tuck, 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 forward. But I was told you mustn't tap the glass. You're going to break it. So you tap the glass to read the barometric pressure. And we had a rule on the boat that said if the barometric pressure changed by more than 4 points, you had to wake up the captain. A captain on a boat is a very grumpy person. He's always just shouting at everyone. He's unhappy the whole time. He's not a nice guy to wake up. But if the barometric pressure changes by 4 points, you wake the captain up. Doesn't matter what's going on. Because a change in pressure reflects the change in weather. Because the wind that the boat is sailing, and the storms, and the rain, and the cyclones and hurricanes and all of those things that a boat on the ocean has to be worried about are a function of changes in the weather system. And the barometer allows us to see what that weather system is. And weather systems are complicated, right? At some level, you've got like the sun right at the top that's heating the planet. But the planet isn't straight, it's tilted, so it heats the planet in one place more than it heats it in another place. And that creates high pressures in some places and low pressures in other places. So the air starts to rush from one side to another. But of course, the planet isn't flat. There's mountains and there's differences in temperature between ocean and land. And so there's all these systemic factors that ultimately create the weather that we experience and that the boat needs to navigate to get to where it's going. So on the boat, although on the one hand, we're dealing with crisis every, just pulling on the rope. That's what you do. That's my job on the boat. I just pull on this rope and the captain screams at me. On the one hand, that's all we do. But on the other hand, we're acutely aware of our relationship with a very complex system that is going to define our reality at any given point in time. It's not an accident when you wake up and there's a storm. You can know that there's going to be a storm. And you can know why that storm is going to be there. And in some cases, what we do when we build things like cities or when we emit carbon into the air is we're actually even affecting that system. It's part of the reason why Cape Town had a drought, right? One, we didn't build enough stuff. But on the other hand, we're spewing carbon into the air that's heating the planet, the deserts are creeping, and Cape Town is drying out. Right? These are functions of a system, but that system is predictable. I was very excited because when I was reading about Day Zero, I saw a friend of mine's name. I was at school with her, a woman called Gina Ziervogel. It's so exciting, when you see someone in the newspaper. And there she was in the newspaper because she's an expert on water. And Gina made this comment that the crisis that we were having in Cape Town with the water had to do with changes, major changes in a system. And she makes the point that it doesn't kind of matter how much technical expertise you've got to stand back and understand that system in order to be able to predict and control what you're going to do every day. If we want to get out of the water crisis in Cape Town, we can't do that by showering in a bucket. We have to do it by understanding the overall system and how that system ultimately results in water coming out of the tap in a predictable way. And I think cybersecurity is the same sort of thing. We emerge out of a system. It's what happens every day when you run around patching Ivantis or scanning or dealing with whatever crisis that you're dealing with. That's not an accident of today. That's the function of a system. And I've spent very much of my career trying to understand what that system looks like. And I wish I could stand here and tell you what it looks like, but I haven't figured it out. But I do think that that system is comprised of, in some ways, things that we can't control, like capitalism, right? Money talks. That's a factor that we're probably not going to affect. But in some ways, just like the weather, it is impacted by things that we can control, like government policy, like what we build and where we build it, like how fast we adopt technology and what kinds of technologies we adopt. And ultimately, those systemic factors are going to converge to produce the outcomes that we see today. And if we take, like Gina said, if we can take the time to step back and understand that system more broadly, then firstly, we've got a way of starting to get ahead of the weather, like the captain on the boat. Like, I don't have to sail into that storm. I can see it's coming and I can go around it. But we can even change the system, like in Cape Town, by moving the dams, for example, to other places where there's better catchments, so that my mother-in-law doesn't have to have a hosepipe coming out of her basin. And so I want to just point to two things in that system that I think are important today, and that constitute part of the problem. I think there are dozens of factors in that system. But the one I want to point to, because I think it's very, very prescient today, is to do with our addiction to progress. This is a quote from the book Dune. I read the book Dune on the way over because my flight was delayed. It's 15 hours of reading. That's how long it took me to get here. And there's this beautiful quote where he talks about progress being this mechanism that shields us from the terrors of the future. Like, we want to believe that we are moving towards a reality tomorrow that is better to today. And for us today, progress means technology. We've got to have more technology, better technology, faster technology, slicker UIs. AI is the big thing now. We've got to all have AI, because AI is progress, and progress shields us from the terrors of tomorrow. But if we don't know what we are progressing towards, if we don't have a vision of what tomorrow looks like for us and our businesses and our families and our societies, then progress is just running around in circles. It's just another form of recycling, right? We're just going around and around, just in bigger circles. So now we have AI can help us do things faster. But are we doing the right things faster? Are we going in a direction that we are aware of? Do we have some kind of vision for what we want tomorrow to look like? And if we don't have that, then progress is just another form of recycling. It's just a waste of time. The other point I want to make is that as much as I'm speaking to you today as leaders in the security space, have no illusions. You guys are the elite, right? You are the cream of the crop when it comes to cybersecurity. There's no one who understands better what the issues are and where they come from than you do. But it is fundamentally not in our programming to solve the security problem. It is in our programming to benefit from the security problem. And again, I'm speaking for myself, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay that we benefit from the security problem. It's a complex system, and there's a place for us. But we need to find a way to put other people in charge of this problem. And I think the people we need to put in charge of this problem are the people who are ultimately going to be the victims when we fail. The people who do have a vision for what they want their digital future to look like. Our grandparents and our parents and our children should somehow be put in a place where they can say, hang on a second, this is actually how we imagine our digital future to look. As long as it's us as a community leading the charge, we're going to be driven by, the Shirky principle, which means that we can never be truly incentivized to solve a problem that we benefit from. Now, that's a hard thing to say. And again, I'm not saying we shouldn't do what we're doing, but there needs to be an inversion of power where the people that are standing on the stage, like I'm standing now, don't work for security companies. Because we can never quite be honest with ourselves if we're the people who are leading the effort to understand and transform the system. Those are just two systemic factors that I wanted to highlight for you. And then I want to highlight for you that I think there is a personal journey that we all can go on. And it's a bit boring, so I'll go quickly. But the first is, obviously, as professionals, we need to perfect our performance. When I was an expectant father, I ended up sitting next to a woman on a plane, and we started talking about children. She had children. I was still expecting a child. And she said to me, "What parenting books have you read?" And I was like, I had that book that showed you the picture of how big the baby is compared to vegetables. Now it's a grape, now it's a nachi. I like that book. But that was the only parenting book that I read. And this little lady looked at me and she said, "How can you expect to be good at anything if you don't study it?" And I was horrified. I was like, "God, I want to be a good parent." So I immediately bought 12 books on Amazon, and I haven't read any. But the point is, we want to be good at something. We need to perfect our own performance, right? We need to be rigorous in our understanding of the problem. We need to be rigorous in our selection of the language we use to describe the problem. If we throw around buzzwords and we use loose phrases, we're never going to get anywhere. The next thing is we need to build processes that allow us to become sustainable. So once you've mastered something, make sure that you do it in a way that somebody else can master it so that you can move on to the next thing. And that then allows us to scale. And we scale by empowering other people, right? By training, by mentoring, by teaching, by being patient, not just with the people in our space, but the people around us. And then we need to move to the point where we start understanding the principles and the purpose of security in society. We all complain about, the board doesn't understand, and you see endless articles about, how do you convince the board about this, and how do you convince the board about that? The board is only the start of our problem. The board is only where it begins. We need people in government, people in policy, people in philosophy to understand that the role that security plays in cementing that infrastructure that society is built. And we need to understand it for ourselves, and we need to be able to commit it to them. And then finally, we can get to the point where we can start to be significant, where we can start to affect those systemic decisions that are made that ultimately result in my mother-in-law showering in a bucket and spitting her toothpaste into the plants. Right, which is not an outcome that we want. All right, I'm going to leave you with this point. The system that we operate in today, the system that results in us running around, spending an entire month patching vulnerabilities in security products, is a system that we built. Of course, there are factors that we don't control, but primarily it's made up of thousands of decisions that we make. We and the people around us. Do we adopt this technology? Do we not? Do we roll it out now? Do we roll it out later? Do we need it or don't we need it? Do I accept it or don't I? Do I have this argument or do I back down? And although this is such a captivating image, the red pool and the blue pool, I think one of the other things we have to realize is there's actually not just two pools. And in fact, most of the time, when confronted with decisions, I think what we need to do is find out what the third pull is. Right? We're always confronted with, do you want Paulo or do you want, do you want Pulse? Do you want the cheap option or the expensive option? Do you want to host in your data set store, your data center, or do you want to host in the cloud? Do you like Google or do you like Microsoft? Do you want Gen AI or do you want Copilot? Right? It's always these binary choices. Do you want one or the other? And I think part of what we have to realize is the system that we live in today is constructed because we are selecting from options that other people are giving us every day. Right? Take this or take that. Take this or take that. And once we have a vision, once we understand where it is that we want to go, once we can imagine a future that serves our values, then we can start saying, but maybe there's a third way. Maybe there's another way we can use. Maybe it doesn't have to be Copilot or Gen AI. And maybe there's something else. And that's all I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for listening to me rant. I hope you have a great rest of your conference. I think this one might work.
Do we have any microphones in the room somewhere for some questions? Here we go. So I have a couple minutes before the break for questions. Sergio has some microphones over here. So if you just raise your hand, we'll bring a microphone to you.
It's all good. We'll have questions over coffee.
Exactly. All right.
There's
a question back there. Sorry.
Thanks. Thank you very much. So actually, I don't totally agree with your reasoning, especially between the analogy of the weather forecast and the whole system of cybersecurity, because we cannot predict the weather with a great accuracy. So the set of equation. So well, I'm a physicist, so just explain things. So the set of equation regarding the weather are deterministic. Okay, that's for sure. So on the paper we can write down equations and forecast the weather. But in practice, it's not possible because the system is complex. So what we call a complex system, it's chaotic. I don't know if anybody of you have ever heard about Lorentz attractors. So it's very beautiful science. And why is it so? Because the system heavily depends on the initial conditions. So the whole complex system is not possible to predict. And with your little instrument, you can just forecast what will happen in 4 hours, something, and take measures at that time. But you cannot forecast the weather for 4 months or for the whole duration of your journey. And so maybe that human activities and cybersecurity are the same, and they are just chaotic, and because we build complexity over complexity, and in theory, it's possible to build a system that is sustainable. But I truly believe that human activities, like the economy, the weather, and maybe the whole cybersecurity infrastructure, is maybe chaotic. So it's maybe we have to just say that it's not going to be possible anymore to build something and with a good policy and with a good system to control everything and to have something sustainable, I think.
You know, I'm not going to argue with you. I think you're right. I've been trying to develop a model, as I say now, for many years, and I think it is chaotic and complex and has these emergent properties, and I don't think they can be perfectly predicted. All models, they say, are wrong. Some are also useful, right? And I think that's maybe my goal more is not to try and convince you that I have a model that will predict the cyber future or allow us to manipulate it with precision. I think my goal is to suggest to you that we need to look up from where we're looking now. And maybe evoking the climate is it's an indulgent analogy, right? It's not a precise analogy. I agree with that, and I wouldn't argue with that about that point. But I think the pursuit of that continues to be worthwhile, right? The pursuit to understand first the one layer, then the next layer, and then the next layer, and the pursuit to try and understand where the nexus is of those factors so that we can apply our efforts there rather than down here where we are. That I would stand by. And I don't think you can do one and not the other, right? We're not going to get away from being on the treadmill today, but I feel strongly that we shouldn't be on the treadmill at the expense of trying to identify the nexus of those systemic factors and tackle those. Is that something you can resonate with? Yeah? Thank you. So I'm looking straight into the light with you.
Thank you. You said a very important point. You said that progress needs a vision or what will happen in the future, and that if there is no vision, progress will just be recycling. The question is, where do you think cybersecurity is going? And can you share with us your vision on how to make a more safer and secure cyber world? Thank you.
I don't know where cybersecurity is going. I've never been able to accurately predict it. I'm actually terrible at predicting things. I'm better at looking back. But I think I have a sense of what we need to do to change it. And as I suggested, I think the first thing is we need to change the constitution of who's involved in solving this problem. I think as long as the charge is being led by, middle-aged white men who've been doing it for 30 years, we're going to keep having the same outcomes. So I think somehow we need to invert the leadership structures and bring other people into the conversation so that we can start describing a vision. And I don't think that there is one, right? I don't think there's one single kind of myopic vision of what a safe digital society looks like. I think that's something that needs to happen probably in quite localized contexts. But I also feel that right now we inherit our vision from an industry that's profit-driven and situated in the English-speaking, West, frankly. And everything we do is to adopt those pockets of progress and try and apply them to our reality. And somehow I think we need to find a way to turn that around and say, actually, we want to go in a slightly different direction to this. It's very hard for me to explain, but we live in South Africa, which is an African country, and in very subtle ways, African culture is different to Western culture. You don't see it on the TV or in the shops. Everyone's wearing the same jeans and the same watches and stuff. But if you understand the relationship that African people have with each other in community, or with nature, or with the environment, or even with things like life and death, you can imagine that they would describe a safe and secure environment differently to how someone in Palo Alto would describe it. Does that make sense? So I think the beginning of the change is to find a way to surface some kind of idea of what it means to be safe and secure, by involving the people who are going to have to live with the reality that we create in the end. And that's not a great answer to your question, but we can talk about it more. There's one over there.
It's way too big of a topic, so maybe I'll try to keep it as short as possible, but maybe the people in the room here are the wrong people for this matter that you're speaking about. What I mean is that in most organizations, security is a cost center, not a profit center. So we're actually incentivized by something else. We're not incentivized by ourselves for the most part. And you quoted Nicholas Taleb, right? One of his books is called Skin in the Game. And maybe the big issue is that the people that are trying to solve the problem are not the people that have the skin in the game. And right now I'm not, but I used to work in consulting, and usually making changes at organization level meant getting the people that should have skin in the game to have the skin in the game. So maybe we're really not the right audience for this, but this is philosophical and maybe too big of a topic. I just wanted to raise it because maybe it resonates with you.
I think that's a very fair point. But I also wonder if it doesn't surface another possibility, which is that maybe the people like us should have a different kind of relationship with the organizations that we work in. If you think of other dimensions of safety and security, there's this concept that the people who are responsible for safety and security aren't employed by the individual, but are employed by a collective, employed by the state or employed by the city. or part of a volunteer organization. So I think your point acutely is correct. We're incentivized by the organizations that we work for, and probably we're a cost center. But I do wonder about the possibility that there's another way to organize even ourselves. And I don't know, I don't know what those ways are. And that's kind of why I wanted to make the point about the blue pill and the red pill. I think, when you're thinking about your startup, when you're defining your DEFCON chapter or your B-sides chapter, or when you're starting a work group for people who, there's an opportunity to think differently about how we're organized and how we relate to our stakeholders.
Maybe liability in a legal sense could be the solution, because if we need to have certain people to have skin in the game, and maybe the solution here is not technical, maybe the solution is not with us, but back in Germany a couple of years ago, there were new laws introduced that basically said, they haven't been really applied in practice right now, but they basically said that if there's major management failure, there is personal liability, not only liability on the organizational level. So maybe the people making the decisions later also bearing the consequences is the solution, because right now there's a disconnect between consequences and decisions.
Yeah, I think that's another really good point. I think it's dangerous to talk about the solution, because I don't think there's a solution. But absolutely, if you look at systemic factors that create the reality, one of them is this idea of an economic externality, right? When security fails, the burden of that is carried elsewhere. It's diffused out into society. I think often in very imperceptible ways. And I think shifting the burden of failure, the cost of failure, back to its, closer to its origin, I think that would definitely be a systemic change that would make a difference. Yeah. There's one more over here.
I think we'll just take one final question, because afterwards we'll have to go to the break. Don't want to run too late.
Hi. Actually, both of us represent a very small organization which funds vaccine research, part of which one of the pathogens was COVID. We work very closely with the WHO as well. For us, it's not necessarily about whether it's a cost center or we are generating revenue. We are not. We are an NGO, quite obviously funded. Our challenge is primarily is how a cyber attack can change the narrative for a society, and necessarily, I think, something that I like the analogy in 2016 elections. And cybersecurity attack primarily could be used against it, and we work closely with the African CDC and the LMICs. What's your reflection on that? I mean, a particular attack in terms of changing the narrative about our research and the works that we do. That potentially is the seed that we are trying to protect, not necessarily the general of the mill revenue and reputation, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that takes us a little off the topic, but I think you're absolutely right. And many people, some people on my team and many people that are a lot smarter than me are exploring this idea of cognitive impact. When we talk about hacktivist attacks, for example, really hacktivist attacks are an attack on the narrative. And it's the narrative that we need to protect. And I actually think, and that's why I raised that point about trust, that protecting the narrative is perhaps one of the critical aspects of what we do. And perhaps we need to spend more time thinking about that and less time thinking about how we protect the infrastructure itself. If you read, for example, what Bernanke and I forget, but the guys who were responsible for managing the global financial crisis in 2009, their whole mission was to manage the narrative, because managing the narrative is one of the ways that you control the contagion effect, right? They wanted to stop a contagious loss of trust. And so one of the ways you do that is by changing how you talk about things, which is why things like how we manage crises, how we talk about crises, how we talk about vulnerabilities and failures is so important, because I think the technical failures will happen, but there's a difference between an incident and a crisis. And the difference between an incident and crisis is often how the narrative is controlled. It's incidentally one of the reasons that I think Ivanti struggled so much in this last month. It wasn't because their vulnerability was particularly exceptional, but just that the whole communication, the narrative around it was really poorly married, and so it ballooned. So I think that's a very valid point. Oh, there's one more there. We still got time.
All right, one final question in the back.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. The question is, I'll try to keep it short. This is a practitioners conference basically, but why there is so much gap between academia and practitioners, although we try to solve the same problems, and why there's so much little money spent in academia and all researchers struggling, all from businesses whenever they hear formal methods, because we know the solutions. Alan Turing wrote 70, 80 years ago. We know how to detect unknown threats. We know how to deal with entropy and Turing complete languages. Architectural stuff we know, how to design computers we know. Why do we not use all these formal methods and mathematics, and why do we not follow scientific methodology that the whole society is relying on science? We use the protocols designed by scientists, either private or institutional, universities, etc. And to solve these problems, we run away from mathematics and formal methods, formal verification. Why do we do that? If I talk to any company, they will immediately run away. If I talk to any CTO, they will say, no, we don't do mathematics. We do MBA. Yeah. What is this difference?
I don't know if that's a question or if you're just giving my presentation again. Because I think you're spot on. I think that's exactly an example of a structural element that creates the reality that we live in. And I think the origin of that is in incentives. As a researcher, we try and work with academia in many different ways. And I find it unbelievably frustrating to make the different sets of incentives align, between what my business needs in terms of a response to this thing today that's going to make our customers happy, but also sell more products, but also be on the news. There's a very clear set of incentives in my space. And when I talk to my partners in academia, basically what they're asking for is, funding for 5-year research projects. And as hard as we try, we really find it difficult to align those incentives. I've never had academic paper published. I tried for about 1.5 years and I couldn't do it because I couldn't align my work with the structures and the processes and the demands of an academic journal. So there's a misalignment of incentives and drivers, I think, and I would agree with you. I think solving that problem would take us a long way towards addressing some of the acute problems that we deal with daily.
Thank you.
A good point.
All right, thanks again. Let's have another round of applause for Charl.